Perfect. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 20th, 2023 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Mikulik, Councillor and Vice Chair of the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee. I'd like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see the Deputy Clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in front parking lot outside the Town Hall. Also, please ensure you place your cell phones on silent or they're turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Council meetings are posted on the YouTube channel. Item 2, roll call. All members of council are in attendance either in person or remotely, aside from Councillor Rajema, who's absent from tonight's meeting and sends her regrets. I also would like to welcome staff in attendance either in person or remotely. Item 3, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Moving along, item number 4, confirmation of agenda. Do members have any amendments to the order of agenda? Moving right along to number 5, statutory public meetings. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. Moving on to consent agenda. We are now considering the consent agenda inclusive of Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of February 9th, 2023, Building Permit Annual Report, Financials, FN-02-23, Building Permit Annual Report, Permit Activity, PD-12-23, 2022 Council Remuneration and Expense Report, FN-03-23. Would any members of council like to remove an item from the consent agenda to discuss? Myself, I would like to, if possible, lift Building Permit Annual Report PD-12-23. Perfect, thank you. There being no further discussion on the above motions that haven't been lifted, I have a motion moved by Councillor Rajema that the motions listed under the heading consent agenda for Monday, March 2023 be adopted and as recommended. Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of February 9th, 2023, Building Permit Annual Report Financials FN-02-23, and 2022 Council Remuneration and Expense Report FN-03-23. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could have someone else move the motion as Councillor Rajema is absent.
That's a good catch.
Councillor Russell, thank you. And with that, I will open the vote. I will now close the vote, and that carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. We are now at the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee portion of the agenda. 7.1, delegations. We have no delegations. 7.2, reports. We are now considering report CS-01-23 regarding 2022 museum accession and deaccession. Do members of council have any questions? There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray. Receive and file as information report CS-01-23 regarding the 2022 museum accession and deaccession, and that council accession 1,573 objects identified in Appendix A into the permanent museum collection, and direct staff to obtain the appropriate appraisal so that the value of the objects may be confirmed and provided to the town's insurer for their information, and that council deaccession 278 objects identified in Appendix B and direct staff to dispose of such objects according to the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center, home of the Jordan Historical Museum of the 20s Collection Management Policy. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair, and that vote is now open. And I'll now close that vote, and that carries.
Thank you. We are now considering Report CS-02-23 regarding Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center 2022 Annual Report. Do members of council have any questions? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Mikulik. I don't have any questions per se, but I just wanted to comment that this is just a fantastic, pardon me?
If you could speak into the mic a little bit, just,
Thank you.
thank you.
I just wanted to comment, I don't have any questions regarding this report, but I just feel that it needs to be mentioned. This was a fantastic report. In the past year, all the work that's happened at the museum and the numbers pages especially were extremely impressive, and they've had a very successful year. So I just wanted to comment on that. So I don't have any questions. I was hoping Jessica would be here. Oh, she is here. Hi, Jessica. I'm talking, I didn't realize you were up there. Sorry, apologies for that. I guess I wanted to go over the numbers page. If we could bring that up in the report, can we do that? I just think it's really worth noting because it has been such a successful year for the museum.
Okay, Jessica, hi, how are you?
Hi there, Chair.
Councillor Timmers, praising your report. Would it be possible for you to comment to the report briefly, in particular with the numbers?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Now, would you like me to share my screen? Is that possible to do, or would the clerk be bringing that up?
Check with our clerk.
Hi, Jessica. We're just bringing it up right now. Give us one moment, okay?
Okay.
While she's doing that, feel free to. It is an excellent
Sure.
report. It's beautiful, beautifully written, beautifully presented.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Simmons, for the very kind words. As mentioned in the report cover, this annual report is a requirement for the museum in our annual submission to the Community Museum Operating Grant, but it's also an opportunity to demonstrate the museum's impact on our community and some of the ways that we can demonstrate the ways we give back and our impact. So there's a lot of exciting numbers, as Councillor said, but I think the most exciting one, if you just go to the page before that, there's two numbers page, so it's page 20 right there. Yeah, for the first time in the museum's history, we've had over 10,000 visitors come through the doors of the museum, so that is an astounding number, to be quite honest, and especially for a small museum of our size. A lot of that has been driven by the ways that we've programmed with the community, the ways that we've invited the community to come through the museum and make that space a space that they can feel comfortable and participate in. So I'm very proud of that number, and a lot of credit goes to our programming team and our interpreters for bringing those people in and the incredible feedback that we've been receiving, which is also included in the report. In addition to that number, we also saw close to 3,000 people through outreach. So that is us bringing programming into the community to people who are facing barriers to access, whether they be seniors or people with mobility issues. And a lot of that programming was actually made possible through a grant by the provincial government. So that's another exciting metric for us. We've never seen outreach numbers and capacity in that area like we have this past year. So the other metric, which is on the next page, which I'll just bring your attention to, was the museum brought in over $500,000 in grant funding last year, which is more than our operating budget. So that expanded our capacity and enabled us to hire staff through grant funding and bring new programs, bring new materials and supplies to the museum. So that's another exciting metric.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica. Councillor Timmers?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Jessica. I didn't give you a heads up on that, but when I was going through the report today, I just thought it was really important to share that. You know, a lot of work goes into this report and some amazing numbers coming out of the past year. So it was very worth, you know, sharing that information with everyone. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next, I have Mayor Easton. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again. Great report. Thanks very much, Jessica. I have a couple of questions. I was very interested in the work that's being done in the placekeeping portion of, which is a brand new part of the report. And I was wondering if you saw that becoming something that we would build on, so that if we look back at how our community developed at different periods in time, post-World War II, in particular, when there was a very large number of people, families that moved here, do you see that placekeeping element as something that can be applied in the different decades that the museum has existed, or even as more of an expansive look at the community to ensure that some of the information that we may not have on the different ethnic groups that make up our community could be showcased? And is that something that would be desired by those people, who are our neighbors, by the way?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor, absolutely, it is our intention to tell a more broad story of the history of Lincoln. So starting with reconciliation, obviously that is an important place to start. It goes back to the very early history of this area, this land, back 13,000 years. We know there's evidence of indigenous settlement in this area. So that's where we've begun. But part of our mission at the museum is to really expand the collection and the types of stories that we tell, so that they better reflect the people that call Lincoln home today. So when the museum was established, there was a very strong focus on the early settlers, the Pennsylvania German Mennonites who arrived here, and that is predominantly where our collections began, and the majority of objects are related to that history, with other objects related to farming history. But part of our plan, if you will, in the next 2 years is to write a collections development plan where we look at expanding and reaching out to different communities and trying to preserve those histories as well, so that we can reflect them in our exhibitions and in our collection as well.
And through you, Mr. Chairman, Jessica, you've put together quite a, I think, quite an expert group with the committees and the subcommittees, the main committee and the subcommittees. And as I look at how you're cleaning up, and I think that's the best word, this is house cleaning that you're doing with the collection. It's good to see that that's happening. It brings, quite a level of integrity, I think, to the decisions that are being made around what should remain in the collection and what isn't relevant. And so I'm curious to know if there's any place at all for the subcommittees to provide reports. I'm not asking for something on an ongoing basis, but if we wanted to become more familiar with the activity of actually searching for more valuable elements, more craftsmen from this area. There's obviously a strategy. You're obviously educating people. Can we expect to hear from those subcommittees so that we can also learn and be kept in tune with, I don't know how to describe it, but it's definitely, there's an education to it, and there's very, very specific activities that are going on. Do you see that as something that council can be educated on as well?
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. So on our work plan is a collections development plan, which, as I mentioned before, is sort of it'll be our plan, our strategic plan related to the collection. So I expect a lot of the information that you are referring to today will be included in that report. Now, I am working on that, developing that report with the subcommittee and using their expertise in that report and the development of it. So when that plan is ready, I could possibly bring that to council with a fulsome report that maybe goes into some of the ways that the subcommittee have worked with us on it.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would be enriching because for quite a long time now, we've been putting policies and procedures in place and really putting that governance model at the level that it should be. And you're bringing money in, and you're bringing in a different group of people who are interested in the museum, and all these things are very laudable. But it would really be, I think, an enriching experience for us to know that the investments that we're making on behalf of the community have a lot of depth to them. And it seems to me that we're at a point now where there's a lot of people, we're losing a lot of people in our communities, and there are many things that are out there that are going to be looking for homes, and some of those should appropriately come to the museum, for sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
I see no other hands up or lights on. I just want to say thank you, Jessica. Both Councillor Murray and myself, we participated in their first meeting. The election of the chair, vice chair went fantastic. What a great group. What the skill sets and talents amongst everyone. It was a terrific, productive meeting. I believe everyone contributes in some way or form. I'm looking forward to this committee, and I'm sure I speak for Councillor Murray as well with that. So thank you very much. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva. Receive and file for information report CS-02-23 regarding the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center 2022 annual report. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Okay. Councillor Bernay, may I get your vote?
Support.
Thank you. And that vote's now closed, and that carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There being no additional reports to consider for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda, we have now concluded the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda. We will now rotate and allow Councillor and Chair Lynn Timmers to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Clerk. We will now begin our General Business and Finance Committee. We have no delegations. Under reports, we will now consider the 2023 Budget to Public Sector Accounting Board, PSAB, Compliance Report FN-04-23. Do members of council have any questions? I'm not seeing any lights on. This is going to be a very short agenda. I'm just going to give everyone another 30 seconds here. Okay, there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell to receive and file for information report FN-04-23 regarding the 2023 budget to Public Sector Accounting Board, PSAB compliance report, and adopt the compliance report for expenses excluded from the 2023 budget as a requirement of the Ontario Regulation 284-09 passed under the Municipal Act 2001. I'll now ask the Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair, and that vote is now open.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no additional reports to consider for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda, we have now concluded the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. We will now rotate and allow for Councillor and Chair J.D. Pachariva to assume the chair at this time for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda.
Okay, we are now at the Planning and Economic Development portion of tonight's agenda. Delegations, we have none. Reports. We are now considering report PD 10-23, Municipal Law Enforcement Year-End Report. I will ask our Manager of Municipal Bylaw Enforcement to provide comments. Mr. Barkway, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing and receiving this report. It's my pleasure to speak and answer any questions regarding the 2022 year for municipal law enforcement with the town of Lincoln. And I can say that I am continually proud of the officers that are in this unit and the professionalism they exhibit day in and day out while they're doing their jobs. Regardless of what the jobs are, and they've experienced a lot of ups and downs throughout the pandemic and the ending of the pandemic at the beginning of 2022, and they've I can say that they've risen to the challenge. I believe you all have copies of the reports, and I'd just like to bring some of the finer points to your attention. Quickly, I can just say that there's been numerous large-scale investigations that have taken place within the municipality by my officers. Those include property standards, site alteration, and obnoxious odors as they relate to, in this case, to cannabis cultivation facilities. These continue to be very taxing investigations for the officers. There are a lot of working hours involved in an investigation and a lot of demands made on them with interdepartmental communication and outside agencies. And that's required in order to lawfully gather evidence to either corroborate or to unsubstantiate the allegations or complaints that were received at the time. And the officers work really hard to gain compliance in all of these matters. They found, and it's been proven, that effective communication has continually been the key in gaining this compliance, both with the property owners involved, the any companies or contractors, outside agencies, including the MOE, MTO, NRPS, and also obviously interdepartmentally as well. Number-wise through the report, I will note that I have 3 full-time officers and 1 part-time officer with the municipal law enforcement, and 1 administrative assistant that I share with the Public Works Department. These officers handle the entire area, and throughout 2022, I will say that they responded to 183 calls throughout the year. I will note that, and I made note of it in the report, that's down from 1,171 calls for service and complaints the previous year. The main reason being the difference is that the results of the end of the pandemic and COVID-19 restrictions. That the year previous that accounted for 167 calls per service. So if you take that out of the equation, they're in the same ballpark for the amount of calls per service that they responded to. Parking offenses, I will just touch on briefly. There was 303 issued parking offense notices in 2022, and that was up from 223 that were issued the same time the year previous. Of note, last year in November of 2021, we brought into effect the snow clearing provision, and this past year, 2022, the winter season was our first year where we effectively had that provision in place. During the snow events that we had, and we had quite a few in the 2022 year, there were in excess of 400 snow clearing provision cautions that were issued to vehicles in the area to try, and that was our attempt. The theory we use in municipal law enforcement is engage, educate, and then enforce in order to gain compliance. And we used numerous methods of education and engagement with the community in order to try and get the information out and gain compliance. From parking tickets issued, we do conduct screenings. Within the last year, there were 38 screenings that were conducted by myself with the town of Lincoln for parking offense notice that were issued. They have 3 results that can take place. Either the ticket can be withdrawn, it can be affirmed, or it can be affirmed, but the set fine can be amended to reflect considerations that are taking place, generally extenuating circumstances. Additionally, within our unit, we undertake the responsibility of governing the crossing guard program. And it's been very successful, and something that was identified that was lacking was fulsome training and orientation for the guards. Some of these guards have been with the town of Lincoln amazingly for in excess of 15 years. This last August, we undertook a program of, during the day of orientation of the full day, we did in classroom orientation and policy review, and then we went out on site, 2 different locations to conduct actual hands-on crossing guard training, to review policies and procedures and put into practice things that are on paper, both at a controlled intersection and an uncontrolled intersection. And we spent the day there, and the crossing guards that had been there the longest, the feedback from them was that they wish that this had always been the place, and they appreciated that as well. And members of the community were coming up as well and appreciated the involvement and getting to see what was taking place. I can say that my officers continuously prove themselves to be professional representatives of the town, and they were pressed to adapt within the COVID restrictions that were put in place. And they had to adapt the way they provided services throughout the pandemic. And this was put to an extreme test through the first quarter of 2022, where there were locally, provincially, and globally a rise in the tensions and a lack of patience from a lot of people. And this also resulted in was experienced locally with protests that took place at some of our facilities. And I can say that my officers myself attended those locations and dealt with the people professionally, and were able to interact with everybody involved in every situation. We were able to, even if it was days and days of attendance, we were able to maintain and gain compliance or gain some sort of conclusion to it that was best for the situation. And from that didn't result in any further concerns or complaints that were voiced to any members of the town staff in regards to our attendance. One thing I want to point out is this has led me to identify some things that our office, our department needed or needs to change. And as such, I've implemented several changes. There'll be a change in the hours the officers work come the May 2-4 weekend until Thanksgiving weekend, with late afternoon coverage going until 11 p.m. This is to cover off for sure any special events, noise exemption permits that are in place, be able to patrol the parks effectively and efficiently, and maintain a presence in the town even in the after hours. I've identified shortcomings in a lack of training for the officers or continued training. And I've been working with the local area municipality bylaw managers in the region, and we've put in place training processes, both online and in-person training, that none of the officers in the region have ever had before. We're looking to do that both with de-escalation tactics, communication tactics, court preparation and testimony, note-taking. All these things will be a benefit of the town and for the members of the community with a better skill set by all the officers. And that's to be something that can be passed through officers throughout the region, not just in the town of Linden. And I just like to, I appreciate the time taken to hear me out, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mike. Excellent report, very fulsome. Any questions from committee? Okay. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Pasriva. Thanks, Mike, for the report. And I read this report twice, and I came back to a second time after the unfortunate incident out in Edmonton last week of of a country losing a couple of police officers. And I read those words that you just mentioned again, de-escalation tactics and some of those radio communication, training and the continuing the meetings with the local MLE managers in the peninsula, and that's great. Have we had instances like that? Are we? I don't want to say are we prepared, but I mean, some of our officers, they're front line to some pretty highly charged situations. They're first on the scene, and I don't know if you can expand on that or just enlighten us a little more about that or those situations.
Sure. Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the comment and question. Yes, that's part of what I've identified throughout my tenure here so far, is a need for better training and continued training for the officers. With it being such a small unit, there are difficulties at times, and we're trying to address those as best as we can. I will say, as I spoke to earlier, the times at the beginning in the first quarter of 2022 where we had experienced the local protesters that were leaning on, some of those situations were extremely volatile, a lot of emotion involved, and the officers did the very best they could and maintained professionalism throughout. I was on hand to be involved in that as well. And, I guess from my background, I had the ability to maintain some encouraging people over those situations. But there are a lot of times when the officers are out by themselves. They attend the properties by themselves where there's no known history of the property or the people that are involved. And yes, that's very true. It's a concern for them all the time. And we're taking steps through the training that we're trying to implement across throughout the region with all the local area municipality bylaw officers to try and get that involved. We're also getting the province involved, and we're taking steps that way to try and get some training provincially instead of being independent to each municipality to try and get things done. I don't think there's ever going to be perfect amount of training to make sure that everybody has every answer to every situation. But I think the fact that we debrief after our situations and make sure the officers have time to gather themselves and think back on what's going on and any steps that we could take to do things differently. So it's a big bonus for them as well.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may, Chair Patriva, just with more of a technical question, Mike. With you mentioned the radio communications, training or the possibility of that. Do you know what that would look like, or do you have any ideas? Is that just just in town, or is that amongst MLE officers? Is it connected to NRP, or what does that look like? Or are you that far yet?
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for that. What I can speak to is that one of the concerns I brought to the other bylaw managers is the fact that there is no standard communication system. Currently with the town of Lincoln, the officers have a work cell phone with them. There are portals, but there's no
range.
There's no maintained or supervised dispatch or communication system for them. So the portals that they have, we can use them during a special event. But during normal patrol, if their cell phone doesn't work, they can really get communicated. That to me is a concern. I've raised that with them, and we as a group, we've approached the NRPS, and we're looking to see the viability of gaining a channel from the NRPS, paying for the rental of equipment for the portals and batteries, and having a dedicated dispatcher for one channel for all of the Niagara region municipal enforcement officers to have on hand and book off at addresses, clear addresses, and there's a way to keep track of where the officers are. And if there is assistance or if there's another agency that's required, it's a very easy way for them to use the communication system instead of relying on the system.
Great.
That is in the early stages of the work, so there's disruption.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chair Patriva.
Councillor Murray.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Barkway. Nice to meet you. I don't think we've actually spoken before. Really interesting report. I was fascinated by the many, many calls that you guys have to deal with. I did have a couple of questions about your last page there about a look ahead to 2023. One of the things that you mentioned just before, as you were ending your presentation, was the monitoring of special events and the sound control required around that, and that how you're going to change your schedules for that. Based on, I just wanted to clarify, so is the plan that those potential noise complaints or special occasion permits that there could be an issue with noise, are they still going to be responded to on a complaints-based, or is it going to be proactive that you guys are checking in on these events?
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the question. The prior approach has always been complaint-based. I've instituted a reach out to the organizations that repeatedly hold events that have, since I've been here, regularly applied for noise exemption permits, and where I have observed that there have been complaints received by the town of noise concerns. During those investigations, officers and myself have had communication directly with the organizers involved. We've worked through some processes, and moving into this year in the spring, I'm reaching out to the local organization and the businesses that do regularly conduct those. We're having proactive meetings to make sure there's everything that's in place. They're aware of the noise exemption permit process and the expectations or the conditions that would be affixed to those permits if they were applied. So what they actually really need to have in place moving forward. Then it also gives me an opportunity to do site visits with the officers so that We're all aware of what's in practice by the organization. Had good feedback from the companies I've been dealing with so far in regards to better understanding the process and what the expectations are. In regards to my officers, it will be still proactive, but if we're aware of events, then they will be in the area and do some on the way just to ensure. Well, we will ensure that we have the contact information for the event organizers, the people that are identified to be contacts during the event on site, so that they can contact them. We do start receiving complaints, they can be made aware of it. But we won't be proactively knocking on doors unless we actually do receive them.
Follow-up, if I may. So if you have operators who in the past have had issues and challenges, I'm not sure of your process. Is it as part of the application process for getting a special exemption permit, does past behavior impact that?
Through you, Chair. Absolutely, it is a consideration taken in, but as I said, I try to work with your company or the organization to correct any missteps that might have been had along the way, in order to, the last thing we want is to impede a local business from being able to conduct something lawfully, but getting them to do it respectfully for the neighboring residents is what we're trying to work towards, and I haven't seen anybody yet that has refused that input from the sort of council and myself in regards to that. So it is taken into account, but we do try to work with the organization and the business to try and get them into the best situation.
Thank you. Can I ask another question?
Yep.
Thank you.
This is your third.
Excellent. So just then the very, very first comment on your look ahead to 2023 is the short-term accommodation licensing bylaw, which you note here would require staffing for enforcement. Are you anticipating that you would need additional staff, or would this just be a redistribution of the staff that you have now?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. As I stated, I have 3 full-time officers and 1 part-time officer, and that actually, as of today's date, I have 2 full-time officers and a part-time officer. So there has been some change in employment, but if one officer or a number of officers are identified that are being required for short-term accommodation licensing portion for management and for enforcement, there would be a need for future hiring in new positions in order to either A, fill those spots, or B, replace officers that we've been moving from municipal law enforcement to full-time enforcement and management short-term accommodation.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. I just have a really quick question. Thank you, Mike, for your report. I was wondering about the number around animal control. There were 26 cases that you had noted. I'm just wondering, what are they? Like, what do bylaw respond to in regards to animals that SPCA does not? Or do you work together? I'm just curious on that.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. Typically, the animal care and control are received by us, but then they're forwarded to our contract provider, which is Niagara SPCA Humane Society, for investigation. There have been few occasions, but of the 26, most of those are where we have received the information, spoken to the complainant, confirmed the information, but then we then forwarded that information to the animal care providers. But there are checks in regards to the property involved, confirming the legitimate checks of the area, and gather all that information and provide that for follow-up information.
Okay, all right. I was just curious about it when I saw it, exactly what, people were calling and what you were doing. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Mikluck.
Thank you very much, Chair Pachariva, through you to Mr. Barkway. Thank you, Mike, for your report and your detailed information. So I want to talk about parking offenses a little bit. And I want to talk about this a little bit because I just got a parking ticket today. And I'm wondering, like, you say in your report that you conduct both proactively during patrol and reactively based on complaints. Do we track the proactively administered ones or the complaint-generated tickets? And the reason why I ask this is because I have to pay $25 now to another municipality out of my wallet, and it seems to me that, the parking lot that I parked in was half empty. It seems like this is a revenue-generating sort of a ticket. Is this something that we should be doing or considering?
I find it humorous.
Through you, Chair. I don't think that I'm at liberty to speak directly to your parking ticket.
No.
I don't know the circumstances around that. I don't think I will. However, what I will say is that we do have some municipal lots within the town of Lincoln, and those are enforced just like street parking is enforced by officers. They do make attendance in those areas and check those areas as well. It's not directed by anything other than my asking that the enforcement be spread throughout the municipality and not concentrated in one way. So as they're doing their patrol, when they're available, they go to different lots just like they would go to different streets. There's a lot of demand on my officers for calls for complaints, but some of those complaints are parking related, so they do conduct enforcement in different ways. We do get complaints in regards to the municipal lots and business parking on King Street and elsewhere, and we conduct enforcement as unbiased as possible.
Thank you very much. And if I may, would it be possible in next year's report to break it down in terms of the number of tickets that are proactively issued and the ones that are complaint issued?
Through you, Chair, yes, that's something I can work with the team to make sure we can. They're going to.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mayor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report, Mr. Barkway. My question is related to the quality of the updated nature or the lack of the bylaws that your officers are working with. And so when I look at the section on the response to odors, it's obvious that there's an external element here that's causing a barrier in terms of our receiving 100% compliance to the bylaws that we have regarding odor. And while I can understand that barrier's been there for a long time and it doesn't seem to be changing, either provincially or federally, is there anything more that we can do with our bylaw? The revisions that we should be considering that would provide more teeth for the officer? Are there court actions that we need to be taking in the absence of action taken by the federal government or the provincial government? Because no action basically sends a message to the public that there's nothing we can do or we don't care. There's any number of outcomes that people are observing. So that's my first question, but it could apply to a number of different bylaws where there's consistent problems. Those are the ones with the higher numbers. And I want to ensure that as a council, we are being afforded the opportunity to review updates to bylaws in order to provide you with a tool that actually will get results.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. In regards to updates to our public nuisance bylaw, I'm not confident at this point to say that it necessitates any amendments to the bylaw. I know of one municipality that has a more stringent condition in regards to odors where with cannabis cultivation, where they require sensors, odor sensors around the property. But I am not aware at this point that there has been anything successful for them through the court process in regards to the use of those sensors. So I don't want to speak to that and say that that's the route that should go. Although I do have communication with the officers from the department where we stand with them. Otherwise, you are correct. With some situations, if we're dealing with a facility that may be a federally licensed establishment that where we're receiving odor complaints, the possibility that the public perception is that nothing is happening, I'm sure is there to a certain extent. However, I can speak to it and have spoken before to the sheer number of hours and investigative hours and interagency communications that have gone on throughout this time frame. There have been attendances and inspections of the odor mitigation systems by my officers, and there continues to be communication, or intensive communication and follow-up with health team in regards to those issues as well. There's an awful lot going on behind the scenes that perhaps some people aren't aware of, but at this point, we have to follow a process when we're talking about a body that's has more in effect in there than we do municipality-wise when they are the ones that issue the license. But the communication continues to be there, and I will note that there is a meeting planned next week where hopefully we can have some forward motion with the federally licensed establishment with some communications.
Mr. Chairman, through your possibly to the CAO, this is very interesting, and it's not something that we're going to resolve tonight. However, receiving a report once a year is great as an overview, but there are some pinch points in this report that are not new, and I am concerned that we are not in a position to give Mr. Barkway and his team the tools that they require in order to get better results in some cases. The community is growing. I think bylaw is a really important component of ensuring that we have civil behavior within our community. Is there any advice that you have? I think you understand what my concerns are. They're not new. I've mentioned these before. Maybe you have some further advice for us that we could take action on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor. So Legislative Services currently is doing a review of our bylaws, and I think I'm going to suggest that on a more regular basis, and even when that review is completed, we come forward to council. I think we share with you what that review has shown. We've got some bylaws today that I was dealing with staff that date back 20 years. Not an anomaly in a lot of municipalities, so I think we need to be looking at those. We need to be bringing them to council and determining moving forward, are there any implications to having bylaws that are that outdated? And what is a priority setting? And maybe we work with council to set those priorities to make sure that we're bringing reports forward and which bylaws council sees as the priorities for us to do. We're not going to be able to do them all. Some are going to require further consultation. I think about the one Councillor Murray mentioned and some of the things we're going to need to look at, from fee structures so that they are both providing us the appropriate revenue, but also that they become things that are net zero in terms of additional expenditures on various things. So some of them are going to take a lot longer. And so I would suggest that I think the appropriate process is probably for us to come back once Legislative Services and our clerks group is finished their review, and then we can set priorities with council together.
Okay.
But I do see Director Bruder's got his hand up as well.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to that, Mike's totally right about some of the next steps we can take in that regard, but I just wanted to add a little bit of context I know what we're talking about here when it comes to odor and the file that we're speaking to, but just generally with some of our bylaws, some of the things that, our officers are dealing with on a daily basis, a weekly basis, sometimes there isn't, the solutions are multifaceted. We have different rules, different requirements from different agencies, all that need to be taken into account. Sometimes there's different specific implications when we're dealing with a property owner. Some things, maybe from more of a social consideration perspective, sometimes with certain things we've got mental health, we've got certain income issues, all have to be dealt with when we deal with certain solutions and identify how we move forward. So, I think definitely we can look in certain areas where we can be a little bit tighter and, add a little bit of teeth or a little bit more enforcement option for us when we need it, which is what Mike was talking about, the review that we can undertake with clerks. I just wanted to add that sometimes files, they can be very complex, and I do have to hand it to Mr. Barkway and his officers because they deal with that quite well, and there's a lot of communication and dialogue that goes into it behind the scenes that isn't necessarily at the forefront. So I just wanted to add those comments, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruder, through you, Mr. Chairman. I think those are very realistic comments. So my second question is related to how we get reporting back. So I understand the position that when you've made a complaint, that it will be followed up, and generally speaking, you don't get much feedback unless you ask for it again, or you go out to the site to see if anything's happened. And so understanding clearly that these, who makes the report is not to be revealed, do you see it as a reasonable or unreasonable request by council or a councillor or the mayor that when it is a complex problem, that that there should be some ongoing reporting, Mr. Chairman, so that we understand what the complexities are of the situation? What do you think is a fair approach to that? I'm looking at you, Mr. Bruder, because you're taking up the whole screen.
Well, thanks for letting me know. But through you, Mr. Chair, that's a good question. I think, it's all about, I think in certain instances, what you're referring to is closing the loop on things, making sure that there's kind of that fulsome addressing of a situation where anybody, including members of council that have been involved in a file, know where it's going and know where it's at on a routine basis. In terms of reporting back to council, yeah, I think it's something we can do more frequently. We can provide you with updates, kind of trends on what's happening a little more frequently. I think there's certain things where maybe not quite appropriate to share, like just dealing about the specifics of files, but just generally speaking, yeah, it's something we can add more to in terms of reporting back, and then just making sure we're diligent reporting back otherwise, just in general communications that we do on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully that's helpful, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is helpful. And I just want to make a final comment because this is, I think we're into the second year of the bylaw review, and we're all well aware of the workload, no question about it. But somehow that list has to be prioritized, even if we're only dealing with 5 or 6 in a year. I think actually 6 bylaws in a year would be a lot to review and to take on. But we need to get on with this. I don't want to have to be concerned that we're not ever going to get a different outcome because we aren't doing the reviews. So somehow we've got to take some of those on that are creating some of the problems. Council aren't the people to decide what that priority list is, although the level of complaints might help. But what are you thinking about in that area? I know that it's clerk's department that's doing it, but it needs to happen.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's something that we're definitely going to work with our clerks team on. To your point, Your Worship, we do have, and Mr. Barkway's even shared some of the kind of statistical information on the types of complaints that we get. And I think that really helps guide the process right then and there, and then just our involvement moving forward. So it's something that we'll definitely prioritize and report back on.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Brunei?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Patriba. Through you to Mr. Barkway. So Mike, I couldn't help but reflect on a lot of the questions that have been asked by my colleagues. And, you know, when I look at the number of complaints, and yes, they're down from 2021, from like 1,100 down to just under 900, but it's still a lot of complaints. And, you know, I'm hearing you say you're down an officer, you've got 2 full-time, 1 part-time, and we've got the short-term accommodations coming on board, and we don't know how that's going to play out. We've got the events, special events and permits. So my question through you, Chair, to Mr. Barkway is, you know, we keep talking about education and we keep talking about being proactive, and I get it. I understand the reason we're doing that. But I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Barkway, you know, as you sit here looking with the cards that you've got in your hand, and yet the number of events that you need to respond to, is there a point where we just have to say, okay, we've done the education, we've done the proactiveness. As an example, I look at clean yards, 116 clean yard calls. Probably a number of those are repeat offenders. At what point in the spring do we just go out and start finding people?
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much for the question. This is because the last part of that is in more recent in my head. I'll just say that in regards to the clean yards files, yes, that number is large. Yes, quite a few of them are repeat. Either repeat address where they're offenders or they're repeat complaints to a same address. So that doesn't necessarily mean we had 167 separate properties that were repeat offenders. That means that we've had 167 complaints. Of those complaints, I would say that I would suggest there's probably a number of those that were investigated and found to be unfounded. They weren't actually deemed to be something that was in breach of anything with the Clean Yards bylaw itself. But in respect to the Clean Yards files, we did have a part-time officer that did proactively go out to the properties where we knew that there were continual problems, and they did stay on top of those properties as best they possibly could. But there is also a misconception in regards to the Clean Yards and what needs to take place, and looking at trying to do some better education and better information to the community in regards to that as well. So the members of the public are aware of some of that. In regards to the investigations, or you were referring to events, I'm not sure if you're referring to the special events like a noise exemption event, if you're talking about events and concerts and where we're dealing with the noise issues. If we're doing those proactively, I anticipate that I'll have an officer in place, so I'll have 3 full-time officers, and they'll be posting for a part-time officer, so we should have the strength that we were at the beginning of this year, moving forward within a month. And the officers will work diligently, and we're coming up with a process to deal with the noise exemption permits and attending those properties if there are issues, because I am concerned about officer safety. If we're talking about events where there's alcohol involved, a single officer is not going to cut it trying to go there and trying to talk to somebody and wait through a group of patrons to try and find the organizer. So we're working on the policy for that. And I'm going to be communicating with the Navigation Police, albeit fully aware that they respond on a priority basis as well. So by the time they're available at times, unfortunately, we have time where the event is over and closed. But my officers will deal with it the best they possibly can, and we'll have a process in place where we can do things properly, and hopefully with a couple of changes to the noise exemption permit itself, we'll have the proper contact information on there, and we'll be confirmed before the event. We'll be able to contact them and get them off site so that we can speak to them if there are issues with having to attend and deal with their possible yearly patrons. So, I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions.
No, and that's great, Mike, and I appreciate that. I just sense that there's a balance here, right? And we've been doing this for a while now. We've built up a great team of municipal law enforcement under your leadership, under Matt Bruder's, directorness, and I get it. There's a lot of calls coming in, whether it's snow related or whatever it is. But I just think there's a lot of repeat offenders, and I think there has to be a point where education and proactiveness all of a sudden hit the tipping scale where we said enough's enough. We're going out to this property for the third time, the fourth time, and now we're going out with a ticket in hand. So I just say that in support rather than it being negative, and was just looking for your response. So thank you very much for the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brunei. Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly on that, I just wanted to highlight that I think you said it very well, Councillor Brunei, just about the balancing act there. I think you're right. There's certain instances where, there is an opportunity to go a little bit more, straighter line towards enforcement when we've got those multiple repeat offenders. It is a balancing. We're never, ever going to move too far away from education. I think that's always a critical component of how any MLE department, any effective one conducts themselves. But definitely your point is very well taken, and I think you were bang on with what you just said there. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Thank you again, Mr. Barkway, for your report. Thank you very much for taking my emails with my pictures usually attached to them and following up. I know the residents appreciate that. Councillor Michalak, I would say you got off light because mine was much more hefty, and the right thing to do, pay that ticket tomorrow. Okay, so there being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers that committee receive for information report PD 10-23 regarding the municipal law enforcement year-end report.
And that vote is now open, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Brunei?
Support.
Thank you. Mayor Easton? Yes. Thank you. And I'll now close that vote, and that carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Devan. We are now considering report PD 11-23 zoning bylaw amendment by 20 Valley Communities, Inc. for 3446 Rittenhouse Road. Do members of committee have any questions? There being no further discussion, I have, Councillor Timmers. Go ahead. There we go.
Okay. I'm sorry, Chair. I was distracted by the phone, what was happening on the screen. Are we, where are we at on the report? Is this the report for Rittenhouse Road?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that I'm commenting on the right report. So I did have a couple of questions through to, I see we had Allison Martin, but perhaps Matt Bruder. I'm not sure who wants to take my question. Just around the parking. So I understand, so there's a severance that's going to happen on the property. And there's some minor, I believe, some setback changes. And I guess what I want to know is how much parking will there be for the new semi that's going to be possibly built?
Ms. Martin?
Thank you. Through you, the zoning bylaw requires 2 parking spaces for each dwelling unit. So there'll be a total of 4 parking spaces, 2 serving each dwelling unit respectively.
Okay, so 2 parking spots per side. Okay, and as far as the parking for the other piece of the property with the institutional building, how many parking spaces will there be for that building? Will that be changing as well? Or is it the same?
Thank you. Through you, the institutional portion of the land requires 1 parking space per 30 square meters. The existing building size, including the proposed addition, will be 176.3 square meters. That results in a total requirement of 16 parking spaces and 1 accessible parking space for a total of 17 spaces overall.
Okay. 1 accessible. Okay. I asked that question just simply because there was a resident that wanted to know those numbers and what the parking would be. I do have another question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I understand the institutional building is going to stay as it is, but with an addition on it. And I'm just wondering what the long-term plan is for that building and what it would take to change the zoning on that institutional building. So maybe perhaps, I'm not sure who wants to take
Yeah.
that one.
Sure, thank you. Through you, as per the planning justification report provided in support of the application, the long-term goal of the institutional lands is to remain for institutional purposes. If in the future the applicant or the owner were to consider residential uses on that parcel of land, they would have to return for a subsequent zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay. All right. And is that 3 questions?
That is.
Okay. All right,
And,
well, I'll
and
come
we've
back
got, yeah,
around.
we've got Councillor Michalak coming in, so
All right,
we'll let you
thank
back
you,
in.
Chair.
Okay, you're welcome. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. So in looking at this report, there was a question, I believe I raised it with regards to the secondary residential units, and they would be required to provide an extra parking spot. Through you, I'd like to know, what does enforcement look like in this case? I don't physically see a parking spot being able to be provided. So if there is a case of enforcement being required because there's tenants that have been taken on in the basement or the secondary dwelling, how does enforcement look like in this case? Would there be an eviction? Would there be, how does this look?
Okay, Mr. Bruder.
To you, Mr. Chair, and this is a good example of one of those things that can take a little bit of doing to get through. But all in all, first of all, there'd be a zoning issue with it because they wouldn't be meeting their parking requirements if they put an accessory unit there. So right there, we would issue notice of zoning noncompliance. They would have an order. They would they could try and come in for some relief for those parking spaces from a zoning perspective, which I can tell you, staff are pretty sensitive to that, just in terms of parking generally. I don't think it's something we would look favorably on. That would be an option, or yeah, they would have to return whatever space they have in there for a secondary dwelling unit to a non-habitable space. So that's how enforcement would look. We would definitely issue them a zoning non-compliance letter, and then we would go from there, as I just described.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to Mr. Bruder. So tonight, this is just an approval for a zoning bylaw amendment. And then the applicant has to go forward, I'm guessing, to Committee of Adjustment with minor variances and possibly a consent.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just the consent, just to formalize the lot lines, because all of the zoning relief needed for some of the site-specific provisions, some of the setbacks that are noted in the report, that's being considered as part of this zoning amendment, which is being heard today and being recommended for approval by staff. But the only thing left, should council approve this application, this zoning bylaw amendment, would be to formally establish the lot lines, and that would be a consent process before the Committee of Adjustment. And we would, as part of this zoning bylaw amendment, we are recommending a holding provision be applied to the property that doesn't get lifted until those lot lines are established through a consent. Hopefully that clarifies, Councillor.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Just one more question about that institutional part. So the entire property is institutional at this point. They're looking to create residential on a portion of it. What are the things that are allowable on the institutional part at this point? Like, what kinds of things could that building be used for?
Mr. Bruder?
Sure, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start. Councillor Timmers put me on the spot, making sure I know the uses.
Well, I think I have a good idea, but I just want to be sure that what I'm thinking.
Yeah, with institutional uses, there's sometimes, for things such as schools, education, charitable organizations, health or welfare purposes, things like that. There's also, I'm trying to look as I go here, community centers, government buildings, things of that like.
Okay.
So hopefully that provides a general kind of spectrum of what could be on an institutional property.
It does, and thank you for that, Matt. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but that was a question that was put to me tonight, so. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mayor Easton, was your question asked, or? Okay, then you go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So through you, Mr. Bruder, if we could just spend a little bit more time on the institutional part. I'm trying to envision in the future if there would, if any, if the list that you gave, and a more comprehensive list, if the complete lists were provided, is there any additional discussion in the future, depending on what it turns out that actual use is? Because some, I would imagine, would be of more concern than others. What would be the criteria that would be, how could we ensure that the institutional use would be beneficial to this community? I could think of, a number of good reasons, but do we have any control over that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, well, at the end of the day, when you've got the zoning on the property, that list of permitted uses is something that, we don't have a whole lot of control over, because that is recognized as the permissions for that property. But what I would say, I think there would be some impact there, just in terms of how many of those institutional uses could occur, just because by sheer nature of the site as it is. It's not your typical institutional site. It's been there a long time. But in terms of more recent institutional sites that are bigger and allow for more of those, that myriad of uses, right? Those larger uses. This site isn't quite as big. It already, when you look at things just such as lot frontage, just in its existence now, it would be deficient. So, I think that would probably preclude some of those larger uses from occurring on the site. I think it would be a little bit smaller in terms of providing kind of the niche service or something similar that it provides now, which I would say, is something that was and is, definitely beneficial to the neighborhood. But you can't really, if there's a list of land use permissions on the property, you can't really prescribe which ones. It could be any of those, subject to maybe other site-specific constraints.
Mr. Chairman, this site has been very successful as a community center institutional use. And does the town have the ability to to identify a desirable use? There's obviously others as well, but that has been a very successful use, and there isn't any other alternative at the moment that I'm aware of.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, if I were to consider that, it would be more, instead of just offering what we think the best use would be, we could work through some advocacy or maybe some relationship building, some relationship forming to work towards maybe a use that we feel would be beneficial. We could liaise and develop those relationships, but I'm not sure we would go in so far as to just trying to provide a list of what we think would be useful there. I think there's other ways other avenues we could go down to try to influence or shape what happens on that site moving forward, just through our own processes.
Okay, I think that's a fair statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're usually pretty successful in that regard, so I would accept that as response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Easton. Okay, there being no further discussion. Okay. I have a motion moved by Councillor Reimer. The committee recommend to council the approval of zoning bylaw amendment PLZBA 202-30010 by Urban in Mind on behalf of 20 Valley Communities, Inc., for 3446 Rittenhouse Road, subject to the following conditions. Number one, that an H holding provision be placed on the zoning of the lands, and then the H holding provision not be removed, and development on the subject lands do not proceed until the following has been completed. A consent application is submitted, approved, and final certification is provided for the severance of parts 2 and 3 from part 1, and B, part 2 and 3 have been registered as a separate lot at the Land Registry Office. And that the zoning bylaw amendment as attached as Appendix A of Report PD 11-23 to amend the zoning regulations for the lands to permit site-specific provisions for the institutional zone and the residential R2 zone be passed and enacted. And that council deem that the zoning bylaw conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln, and that council declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submissions and agrees with the planning report analysis and recommendations, and finds that, subject to the conditions of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Give me one moment, I'm sorry. I apologize, I cannot get that to open, so I'm going to kindly ask that you raise your hands if you're in favor. Councillor Bernay, thank you. And those opposed? Thank you, and that carries.
Okay, thank you to Van. So make sure I've got my numbers right. 9.3, building permit annual report, permit activity. Councillor Michalek pulled this to speak to it. So Councillor Michalek, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. I pulled this report just to bring attention and to ask questions of our finance department, mainly in particular. Like during the budget process, there's talk about growth, and growth comes with development or comes with construction value. And I'm looking at the growth numbers, projected growth numbers during the budget deliberations. There were 2018 there was 1%. Last year was a little over 3%. And when last year we had a construction value of $182 million, almost $183 million, and this year we're having a total estimated construction value of last year's $76 million. What does this do to our revenue projections, say, down the road when assessments growth is brought forward or discussed?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This can represent a timing issue. So when there is development, those items can fluctuate over time based on the timing of development and when those buildings are constructed. We do build some sort of conservatism into the forecast. And so, we would be able to adjust based on how the actuals are coming in. But yes, certainly if the development is at a different rate than we anticipated, we would have to adjust the forecast.
Okay, thank you very much. I just bring this to attention, because when in 2023, 24, 25, we're projecting 3% growth. And I'm worried about this year or this past year, what that looks like, or when that might be, what that graph might look like, and whether or not we're proactively addressing that in the future. Thank you.
Okay.
Through you, Chair, I can also add that MPAC has about 2 years to pick up the new assessment value. And so there is a time lag between when the building permit values spike and then when you see that in the property tax revenues that are picked up. So we do have some time to adjust that forecast from the time that we see the building permit values changing.
Thank you. So if I may, a follow-up. With MPAC, is there different types of new construction that is more advantageous to a municipality in terms of revenue through assessments?
Through you, Chair. There are different tax ratios that are set by the region. So different types of property do result in different tax values depending whether they're commercial or industrial, which tend to be higher tax ratios, or residential or farm, which is a lower tax ratio. So it does have a different impact depending on the type of development that it is.
Okay, perfect. So we're on top of that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Greenaway, anything to add, you being man on the ground?
I'll just speak to a little bit to the report. I firstly apologize because Appendix A only included the month of December, not January through to December. But the Appendix B does incorporate all the data, all the permit numbers and all the construction value. I usually get asked, there was 6 miscellaneous permits. I usually get asked what the miscellaneous permits are for. These ones were for sprinkler systems and fire alarm systems in buildings, so they're a retrofit. So these would have been buildings that never had them before. They usually get an insurance break if they get installed, so those what those permits were for. And I'll do a little bit of forecasting and trend for this upcoming year. I think my personal belief is I think 2023 will be pretty similar to 2022 in value numbers. I have been in discussion with New Horizon Group, which is the building beside Utopia. It's Utopia West. They've asked me 4 times in the last 4 weeks for a permit update. So I do know that they want to start this year. We're halfway through our plan review. I have sent them their invoice and told them that we'll probably be in a position to issue the permit in May. What I'm hearing from them is that they want to start doing their geothermal site servicing this year and maybe foundations in the end of year. So if they end up pulling a foundation permit, then that single permit itself is worth $550,000. So that's worth more than what we brought in all of last year. So we're kind of right on a hinge point where we could continue this trend for maybe one more year, 2023, or if this project goes and the project across the street goes and the one in Prudhome's goes, then we are going back to another record year. So we're kind of right now on the edge of the cliff and ready to go.
Edge of the cliff sounds ominous, Mr. Greenaway. Yeah, I gotta get you a better one. Precipice, yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Councilor Reimer.
Chair Patriva. I'm not sure if I can come up with something better than running over the cliff, but I just want to welcome Andrew. It's been a while since he's been in attendance here, so it's good to see the CBO here. And if we were to compare his numbers, Chair, year over year, the 2022 being at 76 million looks, one might think that he would have been in his office with his feet up on a chair and on a desk and the hard hat pulled over his eyes. The truth is that probably was the case. However, I think that's because he's recovering from the last 4 or 5 years of construction. I have the privilege of seeing Andrew on many projects around Lincoln throughout the year. And when you look at those numbers, I'm amazed. It's truly incredible that a municipality like the town of Lincoln can process, issue permits, inspect, multiple inspections, and close those projects. That's a monstrous amount of work. Those last 4 or 5 years, those numbers are incredible. Andrew has consistently demonstrated the ability to facilitate an incredible volume of permits and projects on a yearly basis. High level of efficiency and professionalism. He's well respected in our Niagara region. And I just want to thank Andrew, to you and for your staff for this report and for all the work that goes into that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I like Mr. Greenaway as much as Councillor Reimer. That was a very nice montage of compliments, all very well earned. I just want to go back through you, Mr. Chair, on the numbers that you referenced about trending for this year. So, again, based on our first quarter, the expectation is we're probably going to be seeing a similar total estimated construction value for 2023 as we did in 2022.
Through you, Chair, I think 2023 will be a little bit higher if we don't get Utopia West going. We do have a couple significant projects that will be issued shortly. There's a industrial building to the south of PL Lighting that's 70,000 square feet. That's a pretty significant project. Custom Crush in Vineland, the Calvary Church on Hickson. These, I've had discussions with all of them. They tell me they want to start this year. So I believe trending through 2023 will be higher than 2022, but if we don't get the New Horizon group started, then it won't be like 2017 to 2021.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. One follow-up. What about there's a couple other developments that have been approved. I'm thinking DeSantis, there's another one halfway up Ontario Street that had, I think it was a 3-story, and then there's a few properties on King that were approved. Any updates on where they are in the process?
Through you, Chair, I haven't had any discussions with any of those property owners. I believe they may still be in with planning, but I haven't had any dealings with them at this point yet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Kirkopoulos.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thanks for the opportunity. Just a couple of comments, and I think to address what Councillor Mikulik highlighted earlier in terms of, how we go about making assumptions and what those assumptions mean. And I think you heard from Andrew right now where we're at. There's a lot of integration between finance and planning in terms of how we come up with our assumptions. And so I do want to put Council's mind at ease. Also the composition of what's coming in. So I think Councillor Mikulik touched on that in one of his questions. A new school being built. And I had the pleasure of going out with Andrew on one of my day in the lives recently and touring the new school. That may not generate the same level of tax levy dollars that we're talking about because of the taxation differences between residential or commercial, industrial, and something like institutional. But it does generate the dollars we're talking about in terms of permits and that sort of stuff in terms of the construction activity. So our estimates, I want to put council's mind at ease, are estimates that take this into consideration. They are conservative estimates. From a staff perspective, we're not worried that we're not going to be able to hit those estimates. And again, there is that lag that Charlotte spoke about in terms of what we're seeing in terms of growth, how that growth's coming in. And there is a decade of growth if we look at Prudhome's and even take very conservative estimates. So want to put council's mind at ease. Our estimates remain, again, things that we think we can achieve. And we may surpass them this year, I think, as Andrew highlighted, if New Horizon comes in this year. But if it's not this year, then you may see, I think, record years next year and the year after. And then the lag of when those get built and tax dollars come in is, I think, what we're talking about as well. So look, two different, connected, but two different things.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Brunet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I didn't know how granular we're going to get here, but just with Mr. Greenaway in the audience tonight, I was wondering if he could just comment if there's any update on the new school at Green Lane and Ontario Street and the hotel behind the Wendy's.
Through you, Chair, building staff, we don't have any, fortunately, I don't have any update on that. I don't know if Matt or Allison, one of the planners, is still here that would be able to, but it's just too early for me to comment on that file. I haven't spoken with anybody yet. They're still in the planning stages.
Ms. Martin, Mr. Bruder, anyone?
Through you, Chair, I can only speak to the site plan application that staff are reviewing for the hotel behind Wendy's. The only update I have right now is that we're at our second stage of submission, and we're just pending another resubmission at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And I'd be remiss, too, if I didn't thank Mr. Greenaway for his tour that he did with a number of us. We got to check out the Ticcarelli building, the bench condo on Ontario Street, and Utopia. And it's quite enlightening to see these actually things on paper that are flat that the mayor always asks for 3D renderings of, to actually see them and walk through them and see the amount of detail and work that Mr. Greenaway and his team go through to ensure that everything's done compliant and safe and on time, and just would like to thank him and his team for the work that they do and the reports that they do and the chats that he indulges me in when I pop into his office. So, Deputy Clerk, can you read that motion for us?
Yes, Chair, thank you. And through you, the motion is going to be moved by Councillor Miklick, and it is receive and file for information report PD 1223 regarding the building permit annual report permit activity. And I will go ahead and open that vote. Councillor Bernay?
Support.
Thank you. And I'm closing that vote, and that carries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Devan. We have no confidential items tonight. Do we have any committee remarks? Okay, no, okay. So, there being no further business, I call the meeting adjourned at 7:40 PM. Thank you very much.